In the dwindling twilight of a distant, forgotten colony on Jorgensen's outpost, the air vibrated with an ominous hum. Garrison Reed, known among the scattered human settlements simply as Reaper, watched from the shadows as the sky darkened unnaturally, obscured by the descending silhouettes of alien slavers. Reaper stood still, his eyes narrowing as the enemy crafts disrupted the serene twilight, their landing gear crunching against the gravel. His hand hovered near the blaster holstered at his side, a silent testament to his readiness. The outpost, a ramshackle collection of domes and riggings typical of frontier worlds, had always been vulnerable, but never before had it faced such a blatant threat. The raid began with terrifying efficiency. Blue beams lanced from the slavers' weapons, paralyzing any who tried to flee. Shouts and cries for help pierced the evening as the invaders rounded up the inhabitants with cold precision. Amidst the chaos, Reaper's reputation as a stoic tactician and his fearsome callsign seemed to buffer him from immediate capture. As he moved stealthily between the habitats, a young engineer named Eli stumbled into him, her face smeared with tears and dirt. "Reaper, they've taken my brother," she gasped, her voice a mix of despair and determination. "Keep quiet, and follow me," Reaper responded, his voice low but filled with a commanding calm. He guided Eli behind a row of cargo crates, pausing to survey the methodical kidnapping of his fellow colonists. "Why are they here?" Eli whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "For labor, or worse," Reaper replied, his gaze fixed on a tall, imposing figure directing the raid, a Zeltraxian commander known for cruelty. His armor glinted under the outpost's artificial lights, a beacon of doom. Reaper knew the odds were against them, yet his mind raced through strategies. His reputation wasn't built on submission but on survival, on turning the tides against overwhelming odds. As they watched, another group of colonists was herded into a containment vehicle, their futures as dim as the fading light. The moment to act came abruptly when a stray blaster shot hit a nearby power unit, plunging part of the outpost into darkness. "Now," he hissed, pulling Eli down an obscure path that led to an old communications array. As they ran, the sounds of the raid faded behind them, replaced by the pounding of their own hearts and the heavy breaths that misted in the cool air. Reaching the array, Reaper quickly powered up the console. His fingers flew over the controls, sending out a distress signal to any nearby human patrols. The message was a beacon of hope, but also a beacon to himself, a call to the warrior he had once been. The array's screen flickered, then stabilized, showing the weak pulse of an outbound signal. "We have a few minutes before they notice," he muttered, turning to find Eli staring at him with a new sense of awe and fear. "What will we do when they come?" she asked, her voice steadier now, tinged with resolve. "We fight," Reaper stated simply, his tone leaving no room for doubt. He checked his weapon, then handed Eli a spare blaster. "Stay close. Aim for the joints in their armor. It's the only weak spot." The air crackled with tension as distant shouts signaled the slavers had noticed the outage. Lights swept towards their position, slicing through the darkness with clinical precision. Reaper positioned himself between Eli and the incoming threat, his silhouette framed against the dim glow of the array. As the first of the slavers appeared, Reaper's blaster came to life, its shots precise and deadly. He moved with a grace born of countless battles, his actions not just defensive but an assertion of human defiance. With each fallen slaver, a spark of hope kindled among the captured colonists, whispers of the Reaper's resistance inspiring a fight they hadn't known they possessed. But as more enemies poured in, the reality of their situation settled like a weight upon Reaper's shoulders. Just as the battle seemed lost, the whine of approaching spacecraft pierced the night. Human reinforcements, drawn by Reaper's distress call, descended with the fury of an avenging storm. The tide turned rapidly, the slavers, caught off guard, retreated under the cover of returning to their ships. As the dust settled, Reaper stood amidst the liberated, his eyes scanning the horizon where the alien ships had disappeared. Eli approached him, her expression one of mixed gratitude and wonder. "Will they come back?" she asked, clutching the blaster he had given her. Reaper's gaze was distant, his mind already racing through plans and contingencies. "They might," he admitted, turning to face the survivors whose looks of reverence were not just for the man who had saved them tonight but for the symbol he had become. But next time, we'll be ready. The chapter closes as Reaper helps the wounded, his figure a steady beacon against the backdrop of a war that had just begun. The aftermath of the raid left Jorgensen's outpost in a tense, uneasy quiet. Reaper stood in the center of the common area, his gaze sweeping over the faces of those he had helped save. The knight's victory was hollow, the specter of another attack loomed large over them, and Reaper knew it was only a matter of time before the alien slavers returned, perhaps in greater numbers. As dawn broke, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple, Reaper convened a meeting with the outpost's makeshift council, an eclectic mix of engineers, medics, and ex-soldiers. They gathered around an old, scarred table in what served as the community hall, its walls lined with patched-up cracks and makeshift repairs. "Last night was a warning," Reaper began, his voice carrying a gravitas that commanded attention. "We survived, yes, but next time we might not be so fortunate." Murmurs of agreement echoed around the room, the weight of reality settling in. Among the council was Eli, her earlier fear now replaced with a steely resolve. Next to her, an older man named Callsign, who had been a pilot before the wars, nodded slowly. "We need a plan," Callsign said, his voice rough like gravel. "Not just to defend, but to deter." Reaper leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "I have a proposal," he announced, "but it will require more than just setting up defenses. We need to make a statement, one that speaks in terms they understand." The room tensed, sensing the audacity of his plan before he even outlined it. Reaper proceeded to lay out a strategy to hijack one of the slavers' ships during their next raid, using it to launch a counterattack on their base. It was bold, almost reckless, but Reaper's confidence was infectious. As he detailed the roles each member would play, from sabotaging the slavers' weapons to piloting the stolen craft, the plan took shape. Eli, with her knowledge of the outpost's communication and sensor arrays, was pivotal. "Why me?" Eli asked, her brows furrowed. "Because you know this system better than anyone," Reaper replied, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that reinforced his faith in her abilities. "And because I trust you." The dialogue shifted to logistics, with discussions on gathering materials, setting traps, and coordinating their limited manpower. Each member of the council had a role, a purpose revitalized by the threat and now by the hope Reaper instilled. Later, as the others dispersed to prepare, Reaper pulled Eli aside. "There's something else," he confided in a lower tone. "I intercepted a transmission last night during the distress call. The slavers, they are not just random raiders, they are mercenaries, hired by a rival colony." Eli's eyes widened. "Why would our own turn against us?" "It's not about us. It's about resources, control," Reaper explained, his voice tinged with disdain for such politics. "They want to scare us into leaving, or worse." The revelation added a new layer of urgency to their preparations. The outpost wasn't just up against alien slavers, but against human greed and treachery. This wasn't merely survival now, it was about standing up to tyranny, both alien and human. As the chapter drew to a close, the outpost buzzed with activity. Materials were gathered, plans drawn, and traps set. Reaper watched over it all, a silent guardian whose very presence bolstered the spirits of those around him. The final scene of the chapter was set at dusk, with Reaper and Eli testing one of the makeshift traps in the perimeter. As they worked side by side, adjusting the sensors and arming the device, there was a palpable sense of camaraderie and a shared purpose. "We'll make them regret ever coming here," Eli said, not just as a promise to Reaper but to herself. Reaper looked out over the outpost, his expression unreadable as he contemplated the coming battle. "They will," he agreed solemnly, the weight of leadership resting firmly on his shoulders. The chapter concluded with a cliffhanger, the distant hum of engines on the horizon, hinting at the imminent return of the slavers. The outpost's defenses were ready, but so were the shadows of doubt and fear that crept into everyone's heart. Would Reaper's bold plan be their salvation or their undoing? The outpost was shrouded in darkness, an artificial night crafted to give the inhabitants the advantage of shadow. Reaper stood atop a watchtower, his silhouette merging with the dark sky as he surveyed the landscape. The tension was palpable, every whisper of wind sounding like the approach of danger. The first sign of the alien slavers' return was not visual, but auditory, a low, rhythmic throb that pulsed through the night. It was the sound of their engines, a harbinger of the looming conflict. Reaper's eyes narrowed as he gauged the direction of the sound, his mind calculating the little time they had left. Positions, he called out softly into his communicator, his voice steady but urgent. The outpost sprung to life, the earlier quiet replaced by the soft rustling of bodies moving into place, each person aware of their role in the impending battle. Eli took her position by the main gate's control panel, her fingers poised over the switches that would activate the traps they had laid out. Beside her, Callsign checked his weapon, his seasoned eyes watching the horizon with a calm that came from years of combat. As the alien ships became visible, blotting out stars with their bulky forms, Reaper's plan swung into action. "Now, Eli," he whispered into the communicator. With a determined press of a button, the ground before the main gate erupted, a series of explosions throwing up clouds of dirt and debris, creating a barrier that halted the advance of the alien ground forces. Shouts and confusion echoed from the ranks of the slavers as they scrambled to regroup. In the chaos, Reaper and a small strike team slipped out from a side exit, moving with practiced stealth to flank the enemy. The night air was cool against their skin, the smells of ozone and burnt earth filling their nostrils as they edged closer to their targets. 3, 2, 1. Reaper counted down before the team burst into a coordinated assault. Blaster fire lit up the night, each shot calculated and precise, aiming to disable rather than kill. Reaper's leadership was evident, his commands crisp and effective, guiding his team like pieces on a strategist's board. However, as the battle raged, an unexpected development shifted the tide. From the north, a second wave of slavers appeared, equipped with heavier armor and more sophisticated weaponry. "Trap!" Callsign's voice crackled through the communicator, his warning clear but too late. Reaper felt the sting of betrayal before he saw it. A member of their own, a young lookout named Tan, was signaling the second group, directing them to the outpost's vulnerabilities. The realization hit Reaper hard, the betrayal slicing deeper than any blade. Despite the setback, Reaper's resolve did not waver. "Adjust fire," he commanded, directing his team to provide cover as they retreated back towards the outpost. The night erupted into a cacophony of blaster fire and shouted orders, the stench of scorched metal permeating the air. Inside the gates, Eli worked feverishly to recalibrate the defenses. Her hands flew over the controls, rerouting power and strengthening barriers. Her voice was a constant presence in Reaper's ear, her updates and reassurances a lifeline as he navigated the battlefield. The retreat was grueling, but Reaper's team made it back with only minor injuries. As they fortified their position, the true scope of Tan's betrayal became apparent. The young man was now openly coordinating with the slavers, his figure outlined against the backdrop of their floodlights. Why? Reaper's question was for more than just Tan. It was a cry of anguish for every human who had ever turned against their own. His voice, usually so controlled, was tinged with raw emotion, carrying across the open space to where Tan stood with the enemy. Tan's response was lost in the noise of another explosion as the outpost's outer defenses were breached. The chapter closed with Reaper and his team bracing for the slavers' final push, the weight of their situation heavier with the sting of betrayal. But amidst the despair, there was a glimmer of determination in Reaper's eyes, a silent vow that no matter the odds, they would stand, they would fight, and they would survive. As the narrative reached its climax, the readers were left on the edge of their seats, the outcome hanging in the balance, the air thick with the smell of battle and the bitter tang of treachery. The chapter ended with a cliffhanger, the fate of Jorgensen's outpost, and of Reaper himself, uncertain, as the alien slavers prepared for their final assault. As dawn crept over the horizon, the outpost stood bruised but defiant under the early light. Reaper, his face set in grim determination, surveyed the damage from the night's siege. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burned electronics and smoldering debris, a testament to the ferocity of the battle. "We hold them here," Reaper declared, addressing his ragged but resolute band of survivors. His voice, though strained from hours of command, carried a resolute timbre that bolstered the weary spirits around him. Eli nodded, her features hardened by the night's revelations and the weight of her responsibilities. Beside her, Callsign reloaded his weapon, his old warrior's eyes reflecting a fire that had been stoked by the onslaught. The outpost might have been shaken, but its heart, the resolve of its people, remained unbroken. The alien slavers regrouped at the edge of the clearing, their numbers diminished but still formidable. The morning sun glinted off their armor, casting long shadows that seemed to reach towards the humans in a silent threat. Tan, now visibly standing with the enemy, was pointing towards the main gate, his betrayal complete. Reaper caught Eli's gaze, a silent exchange of strategy passing between them. "Eli, take the eastern turret." "Callsign, you're with me," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for dispute. As the slavers launched their final assault, the air filled with the deafening roar of blasters and the deeper booms of the outpost's cannons. Reaper and Callsign moved with practiced precision, covering each other's advances towards the main line of defense. The battle raged with a fury that matched the rising sun, light and shadow dancing across the battlefield in a chaotic ballet of violence. Through it all, Reaper remained a beacon of resistance, rallying his troops with shouts that cut through the clamor. "Stand fast. This is our home, and we defend it to the last." Reaper's voice thundered across the outpost, each word a defiant strike against the encroaching darkness. In the midst of the fray, a critical opportunity presented itself. The slavers, overconfident in their numbers, had left their flank exposed. Seizing the moment, Reaper signaled to Eli, who adjusted the turret's aim with meticulous care. A moment later, a barrage of fire erupted from the eastern side, catching the slavers off guard and turning the tide of the battle. The slavers wavered, their formation breaking as the unexpected fury of the outpost's defense took its toll. Amidst the confusion, Reaper spotted Tan, his figure isolated as the lines shifted. With a mix of fury and sorrow, Reaper approached, his weapon lowered. "Why, Tan?" Reaper's question cut through the chaos, a plea for understanding amidst betrayal. Tan's response was choked, conflicted. "I thought it was the only way to save us, to save myself," he admitted, his voice breaking under the weight of his actions. Reaper's gaze hardened, the depth of his disappointment palpable. "You chose fear over trust. We fight for each other here." With a solemn nod to his former comrade, Reaper turned back to the battle, leaving Tan to his turmoil. The fight continued, but the momentum had irrevocably shifted. The outpost, fueled by unity and the strategic acumen of its leaders, slowly pushed the slavers back. As the final slaver ship lifted off, retreating under a barrage of fire, the outpost erupted in weary but exultant cheers. They had held, against odds that would have crushed lesser spirits. The cost was clear in the smoke that rose from the ruins and in the eyes of those who mourned their fallen. Reaper stood among his people, not as a distant figure of myth, but as one of them, a leader carved from the same rugged stone as the outpost itself. Eli joined him, her expression one of profound relief mixed with sorrow for the losses they had endured. "We rebuild," Reaper stated simply, his voice resonant with the promise of renewal. "Not just our walls, but our trust in each other. We are stronger together, and no betrayal can undo that." The chapter, and the story, concluded with the survivors gathering to repair and reinforce their home. In the background, the rising sun cast long, hopeful shadows over the outpost, a symbol of new beginnings and the enduring spirit of humanity. The narrative closed on a note of resilience and unity, leaving readers with a sense of closure and the enduring image of a community that had faced the darkness and emerged stronger.